Welcome to Transformation Tales, a podcast by Shanda, where we celebrate the heroic journeys of storytellers. I am your host, Dumi Mabena, and each week we'll bring you inspiring stories of creators who found their voice, overcame challenges, and transformed through the power of podcasting. Get ready to be motivated as we explore the growth and triumphs and the amazing stories of the people that inspire us to do what we do. Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. How have you been and how's your summer been going?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today. It's been great. I'm working here in Buffalo, a lot hotter than you might expect it to be given its reputation in the winter. But yeah, it's been great. And I know you're in DC, so probably a little warmer, but hope you're having a great summer too.
No, it's been great. It's been great. And I was saying to you offline, part of the reason why I wanted to speak to you is when we were, of course, doing a lot of our let's say interviews about, what features we should build next and who we should build them for. We saw that there are a group of people that go through enormous amount of effort and time to create things for people, or on one hand for themselves, but then also at the same time for people. And they might do it through a blog, they might do a podcast about it, they might do an Instagram, and they do all of these things to inform, inspire. And on your website, you say sometimes you do these things to inspire yourself, most importantly.
Yeah.
But in turn, of course, they inspire other people. So you're one of them. You're one of us. So thank you for being here. I guess for everyone listening, maybe introduce yourself so that we know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, my name is Emily. I'm going to be a junior at Georgetown, and that's so how we sort of know each other. A little bit more about my background aside from the fact that I'm a student and I am majoring in econ and minoring in business, but I grew up in a very entrepreneurial household. My parents had two natural food and beverage companies, and I grew up cooking, so I got very involved in it at a young age. And like you mentioned, there's a kind of people that love to like share their creations. So my sister and I started a blog when we were 9, twins. She doesn't go to Georgetown, she goes to UVA, so not too far away. But yeah, so we started the blog when we were 9, Kitchen Twins, and from there it blossomed into, I guess, sort of this business that we wanted to share our mission with however many people we could, however many ways we could. And that's, where that podcast came out of, our Instagram and everything like that, which is a very cut and dry version of it. But yeah, to say the least, Kitchen Twins is sort of like a product of our love for cooking.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit all the great, like the macro points. But I guess I want to maybe speak about maybe your parents, because I think sometimes that spark comes from somewhere to say, I have this idea, I want to make something with it. So maybe talk to me about your parents and their influence on your approach to life, if I can say that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's interesting because growing up, I moved to New Jersey when I was like 2 years old. My parents still commuted a little bit, and then they were like, all right, we're done with the city life. And they jumped out on their own and started a natural beverage company. And my sister and I were very young at the time, so it was called Bott Beverages. It's no longer around. But I think growing up in a household where you were in Whole Foods or Wegmans with them and you were like doing the demoing and you were, I would sit in and I would like watch my parents talk to their investors. I don't know if people let their kids do that anymore nowadays, but I grew up surrounded by this lingo of like, just like funding rounds, like manufacturing product. Like I think from one of the most exciting things for me as well was like this creative aspect of it. And the iterations. I'm actually have like, this is like from my parents' old company, like on my mom's desk right now. Like, it was all over the place, just these iterations of the product. And then after that, it was a natural like snack company. It was called The Perfect Snack. It was this healthy granola with like puffed quinoa and lentils. I like to say a little ahead of the time. We still make it in my house, but they no longer sell it. But I would say seeing not only both of my parents, but especially my mom is like a woman and like a female founder, that was like a huge part of my growing up, is like having a confident female role model. But being surrounded by parents who were not afraid to like jump out on their own was like my greatest inspiration. I joke, I was like a shy kid. I was the kid crying, like grabbing onto my mom's legs when I went to preschool. And now, having grown up surrounded by them and watched them on like TV and pitch their product and then getting to do that myself, I would say that they definitely taught me a lot about like being confident and not afraid to go for like what you want to do or like what people think. And they're definitely my greatest inspirations. They never forced me and my sister to do kitchen twins or anything like that, but we just had the most positive reinforcement and really believed that, we love doing it and that we can make like a positive impact on the people around us. So yeah, greatest inspirations and very good role models.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, yeah, as you were speaking, I felt similar. My parents are just the
Yeah.
same. And of course, I'm entrepreneurial myself, but I think I didn't grow up that way per se. I think you were 9 when you started, but I think my bug hit when I was maybe 21, 22. But I think the thing that helped was subconsciously it being modeled before me. And I was just always around when calls were being taken and business was being done. And it's just always there. And when you kind of go for stuff, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that maybe all of that inspiration was kind of maybe just like, you're just absorbing parts of that inspiration and now I'm running with it. So it's really cool. And I think it's a blessing to have that.
Totally. It's funny too because and I'm only 20 and my mom would laugh if she's heard this and she'd be like, oh, good. Like I taught you something, but I think also like being able to accept like the failure part of it and being able to accept that sort of constructive criticism and negative feedback. That's one of the greatest things I've learned from them is that like any sort of setback that they've had, they've taken it as like a challenge and as like an opportunity to be embraced versus something like a roadblock that you can't get past.
I like that. And I think also what it also does is that you have a perspective on a lot of the time entrepreneurship seems like a sexy thing. And at moments it is, and it kind of
Yeah.
brave. But for the most part, when you live around it, you're like, oof, that's what your day to day is like. And it's not always as easy as it comes across from the screen or from afar. So I think it's cool that you also got to see ins and outs, iterations, um, failures, starting again, and you keep moving forward. And then the bravery in that, I think, is the biggest gift that you can kind of take. Um, so with you two, so I guess you were inspired. Oh, sorry, and by you two, it's you and your sister. It's Layla.
Yep, Lila.
Lila, got you. So food. Talk to us about food. Why food? I mean, every family has its own thing. Some people, I don't know, into maybe working out or like sports. I mean, you guys might be into those two. I know you played hockey and you do a lot of different things. But food, talk to me why natural food was such an important thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. Both of my parents all say that like we're all very into athletics. My mom played field hockey and lacrosse like I did growing up, and she played in college as well. And they're both like avid bikers and runners. And my dad, they both grew up going like to summer places that they were hiking all the time and skiing. And I was fortunate enough to do the same. So that active part of it and like wanting to eat healthy to balance it all out, I would definitely say was driven in part by my parents. And then my sister and I fell in love with sports as well. The food aspect of it, there's like photos of me and my sister opening like our first chef hats and aprons when we were literally 3 years old and cooking like with just the aprons and hats on in the kitchen, like this coffee cake that we always made with my grandmother on Christmas. And it was like we had a few staples, the coffee cake, these potato chip cookies, and then kale chips, funnily enough, is what we actually turned our product into. But there were like a few things that I grew up cooking. And then it turned into this is really fun. Like, and I love science. I laugh. I came to Georgetown pre-med, so that's a whole nother story. Yeah,
Wow.
that's a whole nother story in itself. But I love science. So for me, it was like a science experiment. I never measured. I was like, recipes are boring. I don't want to follow this. So it turned into like my sort of laboratory of being able to mix things together, and not a lot of kids had like apple cider vinegar in their household growing up. And I was like, oh, like apple cider vinegar and baking soda, that makes an interesting reaction. Let me see what I can add that to, blah, blah, blah. A lot of failures on that part. Like, don't use that as like base of like muffins or anything like that. But I would say, my love of cooking, that was like one prong of it, is that it was like a science experiment. The other part is I would literally get my like iPad out and film myself like I had a cooking show. Like there's a video of me and my sister, like, here's the chobani and the bananas, like making a yogurt bowl, pretending we had our cooking show. So it was a really natural place for me to sort of not be shy and to embrace like that sort of creative aspect of myself. And then like recipe testing, my sister and I did have like a few favorite chefs. Rachel Ray, who we were able to develop a really great relationship with. And then Chloe Coscarelli was this vegan chef. I remember for my 13th birthday. This is so funny. We like went into New York City when I lived in New Jersey. We were closer and went to her. She just opened a restaurant and my parents like got her to come out and like sing to us for our birthday and sign her cookbook. So I had a few like chefs in Giada that I absolutely adored growing up. So just following them also helped like foster this great love of cooking and then just wanting to share it with people, you know what I mean? I'd seen how much I loved watching these other chefs and then actually doing it myself. So my sister and I were like, all right, let's start a blog, like blah, blah, blah. And now we keep up with like our Instagram and the blog's a little out of date. Things get a little here at college. But yeah, I would just say that cooking has provided me with so many opportunities and sort of outlets for creativity and just, I mean, it's fun. Who doesn't love to go into the kitchen and like just whip together something? So.
Of course. Yeah, my wife will be like, if you dare say you do, if she listens to this, she'll be like,
funny. My
Yeah.
parents love it when I'm home from college and I'll come home from work now and they're like, what are you making for dinner? Because they're like totally have turned into like cereal sometimes for nights, like for dinner during the year. And then Lyle and I get home from college and we're like, all right, what do we want? Like, what are we making? And I love it. I'm like, the rule in my house is like, you cook, you have to clean. So, and I love cleaning, but not the kitchen. It's the
I'm a huge cleaner. I'm a massive cleaner. Yes.
There you go.
I agree with the same rule.
Yeah.
But I spoke to you about creativity. I think you read or creative outlets. I think you hit a nail on the head. When we're kids, there's often so many outlets that we have to express ourselves, and sometimes there's like a fearlessness. I would like to say when you're a child, you just don't give a damn and you just go for stuff and you try it out. And I think you can kind of see the way in which you went about that when you're both younger. Do you feel that the older you've grown, you've done a good job of kind of holding on to that creativity and like the desire to express yourselves? Or have you felt like, well, maybe, we should just tone it down? Or I know your Instagram is still live and still active.
Yeah.
Or are you still both leaning into that creativity a lot more?
Yeah. I think that's a great question because when I was younger, I did have, and I think I still do that, like sort of fearless. I got on a stage when I was like 10 years old and did like, it was a live Shark Tank and I pitched like a line of cooking utensils, 5 kids, 4 kids, or when I say me and my sister, and like a cooking show and my sister and I actually won against adults. Like I had this, like, I went into buyer meetings at Whole Foods and pitched my product to them. Like I would stand in the aisles of Whole Foods and like ShopRite and whatever. And like these grandpas would walk by and I'm like, do you want to try kale chip? And they're like, kale, like green, like they're like, keep that away from me. So I'd say there are a lot of things that I definitely just like went headfirst into and didn't think anything of it. I think as I've gotten older, as much as I'd wish I'd still had those opportunities to embrace it, the Instagram has really been our way to just sort of keep it up because we have a following. And, I think it's harder as you get older and especially nowadays with how much content there is out there.
Yes.
There's some sort of pressure, at least in my mind, to curate it in a way that you don't want to be judged or you want other people to see it or you want it to sort of fit in line with what you're seeing out there. And I think especially being in college and I lived in a dorm room this year again, like my sister and I were so busy, it got a lot harder. So I think that definitely hinders at least my creative aspect or like what I want to do more often than not, only because of like the time commitments and everything like that. I would say during the school year, now that I'm home, I'm like, all right, like we're trying to like open it back up again and get back out there. But that's a great question. And I'm always looking for new ways to sort of be creative in the kitchen. And while I might not necessarily share one of those, it's always like when I step into the kitchen, I'm like, all right, it's a new way for me to sort of embrace, I guess, being creative because I'm not an artistic person. I'm not a musically inclined person. So cooking for me is the one way I can sort of tap into it.
Yeah, and that's great. And I wonder why, I guess, when you were young, I was watching one of your interviews, you both spoke about, it's like you were almost ahead of your time when you both said, well, we think if we can create the content and if we publish the content and through our blog, we can grow more followers and that becomes when which you can. I was like, how, this is like pre-social media. It's like, damn, like they were so ahead. Like, where was that even from? Did you just instinctively both know that, hey, make something, publish, grow following, straightforward. That's something you just both intrinsically do, or is it just experimental?
I'd say, it's a sort of blend of both. Unfortunately, nowadays, the algorithm for something like Instagram or, we've tried to do TikTok. It's definitely a lot more difficult to do it for like a food account, in my opinion, when I don't know, sometimes it's just hard to sort of balance the two. But I mean, we have a decent amount of followers for what we do and the amount of time that we put into it.
Mhm.
And now that we're home, it's funny when we got home, you can just see the growth when you put that extra few minutes in, and you can't necessarily do that when you're at school and be consistent. So I would definitely say it's a balance of the two. Like the hard work does pay off in terms of growth and everything like that if you're willing to put the effort in, and if you do have that sort of niche that you're honed in on. And I think my sister and I do have that. My mom's always like, you guys need to show more of your personalities and stuff like that. And I do agree with her. She's like, put yourself out there more. And it's a little easier to do when I'm at home. But I also have all my friends following on that, and they always like text me like, this looks good, or what are you wearing this, or you know what I mean? So there are definitely other elements that I always like laugh about. But yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, on that point, do you feel, I mean, I want to ask you next about, I guess, why you wanted to then take what you're building into like the podcast medium, but maybe that's part of the same question. But maybe the first question I ask is, people were like, you got to be on TikTok. I'm like, geez, oof, that's like so much of myself out, out there. So what are your thoughts on, like, to that point, putting yourself out there more? Because I do agree, by the way, that personality is such a great, and everyone's personality is so different and distinctive.
Yeah.
We fall in love with people first before what they make.
Yeah.
Sometimes. So I do agree, but I don't know. For me, this is easy.
Yeah. The talking. Yeah.
This
comfortable on it.
I'm so comfortable there, but solo screen, that's just like a whole different thing. So what's your take on, being more personable, etc., when you have to do that through social media, specifically Instagram and TikTok and stuff?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question, and I should probably take my advice on how I sort of answer this. I would say it's hard to get yourself out there when you don't necessarily have a following at first, especially because you don't want to be embarrassed or have any of those feelings. One-on-one conversation, you and I have spoken a few times, so obviously comfortable on here and everything like that. But I think that part can be hard to get over. But you're right, people do fall in love with the personalities. I did a little TikTok, and just like my friends would always joke, like I'd be like, here's what I do in a day, and I'm very type A. I'm like, let me wake up at 6. Like, here's what I do, like bop, 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 bop. And it's entertaining and it's fun to see. So I think if you're able to, like, if you have people that enjoy watching it, there's honestly nothing to lose. And like, so much of yourself is probably already out there in the world that, like, at that point, it's like, all right, what's a little more if it's gonna like benefit me more in the long run?
Yeah. I need to think more about this one, but yes.
I mean, it can be awkward though, like having your phone in front of you, or you're like, I always do. Anytime I go out to eat, I'm like, all right, phone eats first. And like, if I don't do it, people are like waiting for me to, or anything like that. I'm like, oh, you know me so well. And I'll try to be sly too. Like if I'm with people that I'm usually don't eat out with, I'm just like, you can't see me on the thing, but I just like snap my phone and I'm like, oh, I hope this is a good photo later. But other times I'm totally just like, no one can. I'm like, don't pick up your forks. I'm like, let me take a photo.
I know, I did this yesterday, but I that one I think it's me. For me, it's more weird when like my phone's there and I'm like, okay, I'm working out now. I like to work out like early in the morning.
Yep.
Like, what, do I then put my buy a stand and then put it in the gym and then?
I know.
Yeah. But again, it's interesting. I love watching that stuff, but being the person on the other side is a different thing. But in any case, that's something I have to figure out.
It's funny I have a hard time whenever I was on TV when I was younger, when my sister and I were trying to get back into our podcast. When we did that, it took me a while to be able to watch myself or listen to myself because it's uncomfortable. We were on Chop Junior, and I have not to this day watched the entire episode. And I was 10 at the time. Like, this was 10 years ago, and I still watched it. We didn't win. I have not watched the full episode.
Why? Just like just a bit. This is a very important point, by the way. Like, there's a bit of cringe when you see ourselves, whether sometimes it's hearing yourself speak or just seeing yourself. Why haven't you watched yourself?
I don't know. When I was 10 and it came out, I literally vividly remember I hid under the bed in my like room, and they were watching in the living room, and I was like, I want nothing to do with this. And I was like so embarrassed and shy, and I didn't win. I got second place, but I was like, And now we actually played a prank on it was Ted Allen was the judge, and now I'm sure would be really funny to watch. My sister and I, we don't look at him as much alike now, but we literally like, even I'm like, which one is which? So now I'm sure it would be entertaining, but I could just never get around to watching it. I'm sure it'd be endearing and cute because we're so young, but I don't know. It was like, yeah, maybe cringe or something like that. So
Yeah, I think this is an important thing. So there's this, I'm going to be a bit cheesy here, but there's this quote that's like, our deepest fear, not that we're inadequate. It's like our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. And I think sometimes when we're doing stuff that's like really out there and outside of the norm, it's quite literally terrifying.
yeah.
I know when we were doing all of our, interviews for Shanda and being like, okay, we can of course make editing easier and make it more streamlined and so on and so forth. But what we found was, on one hand, of course, that's very important. But underneath, part of like the biggest hurdle isn't even like editing. It's people feeling shy to hear their own voices on a computer, which is like a whole different thing. So it's the same way you're like, I'm terrified to see myself on screen. Some people are scared to even, speak into a microphone, have a conversation, publish it, and then hear themselves speaking, which is a very weird thing. So I think a lot of the time it requires a lot of coaching. So you still go on Chopped, but you maybe need to be coached back into watching it and being like, it's okay. It was a great but I guess on that point, why podcasts? Like, why was that an outlet? I know what we found, which is interesting also, people like I had a blog too, but then I also had a blog first, then a pod. I was like, why? I didn't put two and two together, but then I started seeing you do the same. Why did you and your sister do that? Have both of those mediums?
No, it's a great question. So I think our last episode was like a year ago, which we had, like I said, we got to get back into it. But people joke, like my sister and I are like, just text constantly, do all this stuff. So
You're
we're
twins.
like, well,
You're twins.
Yeah, no, exactly. So people are like, all right, it's a good way to sort of like have other people hear us talking with each other. It's like, I joke, it's like a fly on the wall sort of perspective. So that's why we started it. And it sort of blossomed into what we were able to do is like a sort of female entrepreneur and women in business series where we ended up doing a lot of interviews. I love listening to podcasts, and I'm like, and you name how I built this episode with like eyebrows. I'm sure you're very familiar. I feel like I'm his number one fan listening to it. But I loved it. So I was like, well, why don't we take something that, my sister really enjoys it too. I'm like, let's take something that we love and sort of do our own spin on it. So we were able to do, interview some really successful people in, venture capital, or foodies, or people who had started their own brands, the founder of Top Seeds, or, some people in very successful marketing positions, or even like a guy that, wrote for the food section of the Buffalo newspaper. So I loved it because I love hearing other people's stories and their sort of avenues to how they've ended up with like a job that they love. And oftentimes they're very surprising, and you always learn something from it. That's what I loved. So, it was just another way for us to share other people's stories. And those I did listen to, because I was like, I had to make sure it sounded good. And with what you're doing with Shonda, like I said before, I'm like, it's so great because half the hurdle for me and my sister was having to do the recording and editing. So
yes, no, I completely, that's very kind of you. But I think what I totally agree with you when I was saying earlier, you're one of us, which is there's something truly enjoying, or rather something truly enjoyable about hearing somebody's story. And I think, and you can learn something from everybody, literally everybody. What was, this is going to be put you on the spot, what was the most interesting thing that you learned? Like, wow, that was kind of pleasantly surprising in one of your recordings. I know it was a while ago.
So. Oh gosh, yeah, I know. Now I'm like totally surprised. And I'm gonna have to like go look back through it. It's funny, I'll say this only because we talked about it earlier on, and it was one of our earliest episodes was interviewing my mom and on the podcast, and just like an inspiration, and listening to her from like a professional perspective was totally interesting. But I think everything that she hit on is like being a female founder and not being afraid to she's like the biggest go-getter I know. She's like starting something new right now, and just not being afraid to sort of take that first jump, even if you think you're like ahead of your time or anything like that, is one of the greatest things that I've learned. And also, this isn't necessarily specific to any episode or person I've talked to, but like, I've learned like just the listening skills, like, you know what I mean? When you really tap in and you're like, it's how to have like a meaningful conversation and not following the script or anything like that. We'd always have like a few ideas of things we wanted to talk about. And I say this because it's something we learned, is that like, you don't need to follow the script. And it is harder when you have two people. My sister and I joke, we pinch each other under the table, like when we're like, no, it's my turn, or like you're talking too long or something like that. And you hear yourself rambling. But it's definitely like given me the ability, I feel like, to have like a meaningful conversation and just have like an openness and like willingness to learn and hear about other people's stories without wanting to jump to like the next thing.
Yeah, totally. And thank you so much for sharing that about your mom and also what you've learned from it. I think it's a constant learning process. I think the analogy I use is kind of like you're driving a car to a destination, and when you ask the right questions, you're kind of steering the conversation, and sometimes you steer it way off track. You're like, okay,
yep.
Let's get it back on track now, and then you have to keep driving the conversation. But it's like shifting your perspective of being in the conversation like normally, but then also being outside it, and then being like, whoa, do we need to get back on track here because you're losing the plot? So it's a really different perspective of learning how to listen in a way that's really impactful. What has been a favorite thing about working with your sister over the past year?
I mean, as a twin, and I've heard the saying over and over again, you know, you're built-in best friends. My sister both of us just got back from vacation today, and the first thing I did when I like came home from work was like run into the kitchen and talk to her for an hour. And it's while we were like cooking dinner, we were just like chopping things up. And I think that's one of the things, is that the kitchen has given us such like a natural place to like be comfortable and talk and like enjoy good food over too. Granted, of course, we get into fights over like posting and stuff like that and figuring it out. That's natural, I think, with any co-founder or anything. You know, my parents were co-founders together. I surely understand it. And my sister and I, it can get heated. You can be like, oh my God, you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, or like you did this wrong, or like this video is horrible, the audio sounds bad. But we laugh. It's like a minute later and it didn't even happen. So I think it's actually been a great strength to our relationship having had work together, because it's given us a lot of skills to then use our sort of, I'm going to, you know, do bunny quotes or whatever they're called, like use our like business, I guess our business negotiation skills, with our like personal relationship skills. And it's just fun. Everyone loves doing stuff with their sisters, and we played the same sports growing up, field hockey and lacrosse, and we love running together. So we have a lot of the same hobbies, and to have one that has given us so many opportunities to do together. And, you know, a lot of people can't necessarily go get on a stage and go talk to adults themselves, or give like, we do a lot of cooking shows and stuff. And it was always nice to have that added comfort. If you flubber on the stage, or you mess up a line, or forget the answer to a question, you have someone there who probably will know the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And I think, to your point, it's nice having a built-in best friend, I think, who's with you literally for life. That's truly a blessing. As we draw to a conclusion, I want to just ask you a couple of questions. Question number one, what is your favorite thing about stories? Mm-hmm.
About stories? Like people's personal stories kind of thing?
Yeah.
I would say, if you're listening to them, only because we are doing like a podcast and stuff, the animation that people get in their voice when you can tell they're really excited and passionate about what they do is, for me, I feel like you can totally hear that sort of change, and you know, like this is going to be an important moment. You know, there are stories that have their ups and downs, and the ones that come from like the most surprising beginnings are obviously like the most exciting. I just listened to like Dave's Hot Chicken, like how they got started, and these guys were like in like a parking lot, and then they grew to like this like huge company, like with like so fast and overnight it seemed. And just like unexpected ones, I like off of how I built this, and I know I'm rambling a little, but like the story of Liquid Death, how he started out with literally a marketing plan and then turned it into this water. It's like one of the most genius things, and I always, you know, I like to keep those kind of things in my head. I'm always thinking, I'm like, oh, could you do this with this kind of thing or whatever. So I love that and what you can learn from them. That's great. I can go on about I listened to that Liquid Death episode on how it was so, because anyway, I just think it's I'm fascinated about brands that come into extremely crowded spaces, like extremely saturated spaces, like everyone's water really, and somehow they find a way, and that's
one of the best examples I've seen in I
Yeah.
guess in my life, to be honest, about being differentiation. Like it's so good.
Yeah.
It's super
People always
insightful.
ask me, they're like, if you started a company, wouldn't it be in food and beverage? And I'm always like, no, because the markets are so saturated. But I think what he did was brilliant. So
So there's always a little niche if you can
yeah.
find it inside. Then the last question I have is, I think I considered you and your sisters. I mean, you're many things, but I guess my last question is, what is your favorite thing about building?
Like building a brand.
Building anything. You've built a brand, you've built a book, you like listen to how I built this.
Yep.
You're always, I feel like you're always, maybe it's creating is the right word, creating
Yeah.
or building.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing about that? Because it clearly, I think, feels like one of the drivers, or consistent. Even right now, you're kind of interning at a startup accelerator, right? Where people are building things. So
Yeah.
clearly there's something around creation and building. So what is your favorite thing about that you can leave with us before we
Yeah.
go?
I would say my favorite thing is probably the creative process. You know, you always have like some sort of goal in mind and you're like, all right, this is what I want it to look like, but it never ends up turning out that way. And I always love to see sort of how it gets reiterated and turned, and, you know, molded into something new. Like even just this morning, I was like, all right, let me make a snack before I go to work. And I'm like, I'm just going to do protein balls, whatever. And I ended up turning it into this totally like different, like protein bar. And this is going to sound like ridiculous to anyone who's whatever, this totally different thing. And I was like, oh, wait, this is actually really good. And I think just seeing those sort of twists and turns for me that are positive, is always good. And, you know, even when they're negative, you always learn something from them. And obviously no one likes those sort of things, but they're awesome to learn from. And like you said, I'm interning this summer at a startup accelerator. And one of the most exciting things I've gotten to do is just look through like all these companies like pitch decks and be like, oh, this is brilliant. And anything like that. And just be like, how did they come up with this? So like the idea generation stage, I think is really exciting when you have the idea and you're able to implement it and get it onto paper or get into writing or you get it into the oven. So
Yeah, it's great. Actually, I know I said two, but one last one. On your website, on your sister Neil's website, you said, I think it was something, I'm going to paraphrase this, something to the tune of, it's important to be inspirational, not really for others, but to yourself, which I thought was very deep, very, very deep. So my parting question for you is, how are you inspiring, or are you inspiring yourself today?
Yeah. It's something along the lines of probably being your own greatest inspiration and everything like that. I think everyone has a vision of their mind of who they want to be, who they are right now, and who they sort of have the potential of being. And that sort of potential of who you can be, I think, is where I draw my most inspiration from. And whether that is bettering yourself through things like reading or like listening to podcasts. I just read like Atomic Habits. So like, it's just even just the little things in your life, you know, you can learn from and you can make yourself a better person. And then in terms of like the inspiration on like the more creative aspect of it, I'm always looking for those other ways to sort of, I guess, tap into like what's new, what's exciting, whether that's like sitting on my phone on Instagram Reels and looking through all the recipes, which I say is inspiration, but I just love doing that. I mean, who doesn't? It's like sitting on TikTok or anything. It's just like more foodie oriented. But I think those are ways that I'm my own inspiration, or even just like I have like a Google Doc sheet or whatever, and it's literally just called ideas of just like writing.
Oh.
It's a few pages long of just like things. I'm like, oh, this is a problem. I'm like, here's a potential solution, stuff like that. So, and I look back to it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, my mom has like notebooks around her house of just
I literally have the same thing.
Yes,
it's like an ideas tab, and it's just like pages and pages of just stuff.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I love it. That's so exciting. And this is exciting for me because I'm like, okay, maybe one day I'll actually get out there and start one of these ideas like you did. But yeah, I guess that's like essentially what it is. It's just like drawing from like who, yeah, like I said, like the potential of who you want to be, I think is where you can get your greatest inspiration from, of like envisioning like better self and sort of what you can put out there. My mom's always like, oh, you get more bees with honey, blah, blah, blah. But it really does ring true, when you focus on it. So.
Fantastic. Emily, thank you so much for being with us, sharing your story, inspiring. You're super inspiring, of course. And thank you so much. It's been wonderful getting to speak to you more, as always.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on today. Pleasure to speak and excited to see what you do.
Thanks for tuning into Transformation Tales. We hope these stories inspired you to keep creating and sharing your voice with the world. Remember, every storyteller's journey is unique, but the courage to start and persist unites us all. Join us next week for more empowering tales of transformation.